Welcome back to Around the District. I'm Nicole Brown, and we're continuing our discussion with Cedric Collins here today. So, Cedric,
Yes.
our districts, like many others, face challenges around funding, teacher retention,
hmm
and curriculum choices. What do you see as the biggest challenge right now, and how do you plan to address them, like on the school board?
Well, first of all, let me just make this statement. These statements are my own, not a representation of the board that I represent. Okay, let me just make that statement. Okay. Now to answer your question, ask it again because there were like three parts, so I want to make
Right.
sure I answer them efficiently.
What do you see as the biggest challenges right now, and how do you plan to address them as an educator? Or even on the board if you're, you know.
Okay, so a lot of the issues that we're facing nationwide, but I'll speak on the state of Arizona because this is the state where I reside and where I serve. Obviously, funding. Funding has always been an issue in public education um, for years, right? And the more urban the area, the less funding they have access to. That's an open secret. No, everyone knows that. Um, but what we have to understand is, in my personal opinion, a lot of that is systemic because the lower the education rate, the higher the crime rate. And I growing up where I grew up and then going off to college and living, due to certain careers that I've had, I've been able to live in nice areas, the suburbs or uppity areas, so to speak, right? Higher income areas. That's when I really would notice the difference, right?
Right.
And I even noticed when I would encounter certain people, and as I got older, and I have friends who have kids, and they're like moving to different states or moving to different neighborhoods, and the first thing, especially the wives would always ask, "Oh, we want to know what the school systems are like." That's something that never really registered to me as a young person, right in my 20s. What are the school systems like? Because we just went to school, and so that is something that's key. So it's like the higher your graduation rate, the lower your crime rate is, and that's been statistically proven. And so um, it it's sad because we are living in a time, Arizona, since 20, and I could be corrected on the year, but I want to say since 2021, the state of Arizona has closed 25 schools throughout the state. 25 schools. But you know what hasn't closed now? Prisons.
Prisons. I was going to say the same thing.
So how is it that we're closing schools but opening up more prisons, right? And I get prisons are quote unquote privatized. They have private owners or investors or whatnot. Okay, well then why don't we have these private investors and also in public education, even though it's public education, and public, right? That's one thing a lot of people don't understand. People expect you to work miracles with funding and budgets, but a lot of people don't realize many schools, public schools especially, are 501c3s, which are basically nonprofits.
Nonprofits.
So I run a nonprofit, and when I get money from the federal or state, I have to do exactly what they tell me to do with that money. I cannot deviate. It's the same thing with schools. When you receive money from a federal or state entity, you have to do exactly what they tell you to do or what you say you're going to do with that money. It sucks. It's not fair, but it's unfortunate. That's why, a lot of people have an issue with charter schools. Charter schools are public schools, but
Right.
charter schools don't have the oversight that regular public schools have, right? And of course, private schools, they can do whatever they want because parents are paying tuition and, through grants or whatever the case may be. And they're using ESA vouchers.
I
Let's
was
not
going to
let that,
say,
I wasn't going to let that slip.
let's talk about that because there's a big issue with the EAS vouchers and
Oh, yes.
what it really means to
Yes.
get one.
Yes. Um, that's the thing. I also do a lot of conferences. So I remember a couple of summers ago, I had to go to Washington D.C. for this educator conference through Sphere. This is an organization called Sphere, the Cato Institute, and they do this big summit every summer in D.C. And I went, and then, you get these name tags. They have you register, pre-register, so you get your little name badge, and it has your name and the state you're from. And I kid you not, everybody, because there's only a select few of us. So I think I was the only one from Arizona, but there were multiple people from other states. No, I'm lying. There was one other person from Arizona, but most of everybody else was from multiple states. So I came across, I had befriended a few people from Jersey and Florida and New York. And the first thing they said to me, I BS y'all not, you guys have a problem with vouchers in your state.
We do.
And we do.
We
And
absolutely.
and you know, that has really drained the education system out here in Arizona, which is why, a lot of school districts are in the trouble that they're in terms of like declining enrollment. Of course, declining enrollment means less money. Um, and and here's the thing. Let me preface this, right? I believe it's not my place to tell a parent what school they should send their kid to. Even though I'm a public educator and I reside on a school board, it's not my job to tell you
Right.
that. You make the best decision, whatever it is you got to make for your kid. However, what I do have an issue with is there's no oversight on these vouchers, right? And if you want to take your kid to private school, then just like my brother and his wife, they had to pay for it out of their pocket. My brother was a Marine for 23 years. He retired. Now he has a government job, and
Like my husband.
and they paid for my niece to go to private school, and she got some scholarships. Because she was an athlete, so they had like people who donate for the scholarships, and she was able to get scholarships because my nieces and nephews, they all went to private school, but they were phenomenal athletes, so they were able to get scholarships to also go to private school along with my brother paying tuition. But him and his wife, I don't even think they even looked into vouchers because it was something that, once again, and I'm just going to keep it real. People say everything's not about race. If it's not about race, why it is on applications? But anyway,
Well, let's talk about your family being athletic, because
well, no, I'm gonna tell you that.
you're a
So
little bit of that too.
so here's the thing, right? My brother and his wife, because guess what? They didn't have access to that information.
Yeah.
They didn't, because I remember I was talking to my brother about that. I said, of course, running in politics, I remember asking my brother, I said, do you and vet use vouchers? He goes, bro, I ain't gonna say what he really said because my brother's Marine, he cuss all the time. But he was like, what the F is that? And because they
Yeah.
they were not giving that access to that information. So as far as he knew, if he wanted his kids to go to private school, he had to pay for it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's the thing about it. A lot of people, it's getting the access to the information, right? And where's the vouchers being predominantly used at?
In the private schools, right?
Well, no, but what areas?
Oh, like Scottsdale or
Well, we want you say Scottsdale. A lot of people out here use them.
yeah, Gilbert. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's primarily higher income, affluent areas where our parents have the luxury. One parent could stay at home and homeschool or whatever the case may be, right? Because not everybody, a lot of kids in South Phoenix and certain parts of Tempe and even Chandler, they don't have the luxury. Their parents don't have the luxury of using a voucher, right? So I think a lot of the issues is that need to be, because here's the thing. Everybody talk about vouchers, this, vouchers, that. Listen, man, I can go back to the Martha McSally days. If you remember Martha McSally, those of you who know, if you know, you know. And so, we've been talking about vouchers for years. And let's not get it twisted. Why were vouchers created? It was created to help severely handicapped students, right? Because a lot of public schools don't have the resources or the facilities to help students who need certain types of treatments and certain types of amenities in schools, public schools, right? So let's not get it twisted. That's where the voucher came from. And then other people, like anything else, started using it to their advantage. And then there was no oversight put on there. And I always like to say this, and I said this in a meeting I was in last week. The people who make the rules for us, I don't have children, but the people who make the rules for you and your children, their kids don't go to public school. Understand that next time you vote. Their kids go to private school. Their kids go to high-end charter schools, or they homeschool their kids. So understand that the next time you vote, the people who are making decisions for you and your family, their family don't encounter the same struggles that you're struggling with. understand that. And that's something that I learned at a very young age.
It's like a corporation where the people making decisions about
Right.
the policies that are put in place in a business aren't the ones that actually doing the work.
Right, exactly.
It's like the same type of
right. It's well,
concept.
you work in education,
Yeah.
right? You get
I
the
still do.
you get you get the district admin throwing all this new stuff on teachers, but they're not the ones in the classrooms.
Right.
Like, like my brother used to always, I always reference war because my brother was a Marine. He was a warrior. He went to war 4 times for this country. And so I always reference that. It's like going to war, right? The general's sitting back in a nice little tent or hut with a fan blowing on him, telling the troops what they need to do, but he's not out there getting shot at. And you're trying to correct my behavior, but you're not the ones dealing with the gunfire and all that. It's the same thing with being an educator. Like, you're sitting here trying to implement all these different policies. Well, guess what? You're not the one who has to deal with that. You're not the one who has to deal with the parents. You're not the one who has to deal with the kids, the issues of the kids, because, as a teacher, especially a high school teacher, right? I remember one academic year, I had over 320 students. I was averaging like 40, 50 kids a class. So think about that. That's 320 personalities in a day.
It is true. I do remember those days as an educator. But let me ask you this though. The schools are not designed, in my opinion, tell me if I'm wrong about this, based on my teaching experience, to teach you the skill sets that you need to learn about policies or things that are beneficial to you. To me, it's more designed to just teach you how to like as an educator, we had to teach to a test.
Right.
We didn't teach them to learn. We taught them to learn how to pass a test. And
Right.
and there's a difference.
Right. Well,
do you still see that today?
Well, one of the things that I always try to tell my students, right? I teach a very simple subject. I teach life skills 101, which is basically teaching them things about life, right? And I teach freshman success, which is helping students transition from junior high to high school. Very simple classes. And I tell them it's simple, but it's very complex. And so with it being complex, what I mean by being complex is, all right, I'll use an example and then I'll tell you what. So I remember when I was pledging my fraternity and we were standing at one of the house and my dean was like, okay, I need you guys to knock down the wall. Very simple concept, right? Knock down the wall. So the line brothers before me, right? They were talking about, some of them was like, one of them, I remember one saying, I don't have any tools. And then another was like, he runs up to the wall and he starts punching and kicking the wall. Because his initial reaction was to, and in his mind, he thought maybe it was like some fake wall and it'll fall down. So I'm sitting there and I'm watching him. I had the benefit of going last. Sometimes it's a benefit. You get to watch everybody else. And so I'm sitting there and I'm watching. And so my grandfather always taught me, be a thinker, always assess, even in the middle of things. So I walk over to the wall and I start knocking down the wall. And I'm kind of like looking unsure, like, and he goes, that's it. Knock down the wall. That's what I'm talking about. Knock down the wall. You didn't, and so it's the same concept, right? So we're not teaching the critical thinking skills. I try to teach critical thinking skills. And that's why I tell my students, that's why it's so hard for them in that class, because you're going to get a chance to think for yourself. I'm not going to tell you what to think. There's no right or wrong answer in here. Because in life, when you make a choice, you're making a choice based off of your best assessment. Yeah. Sometimes you can have all the things lined up in a row and you make a choice and it could go awry. So think about how the culture of education was created, right? Anybody know? You know?
I do know. I think.
So how was it created? The culture of education, and I've said this, and I've said it on camera before, and I say it again. The education system is archaic and out to date. It seriously is. This whole concept, the Henry Ford model, right?
Right.
8 hours a day. And that's what I tell my students. I say, you think about it. School prepares you for work. Yeah. You get up in the morning, 5 or 6 in the morning. What time your parents get up for work? 5 or 6 in the morning. Okay. You get dressed. In some cases, some schools, you wear a uniform. What do your parents wear to work? Uniforms. You work 8 hours a day. How long do you go to school? 8 hours a day. Your parents get paid. Right? How do you get paid? You get a grade, right? This grade, depending on how well you do, that's your paycheck, right? If you do well, you get A's. If you don't do well, you get an F, right? And if you get an F, obviously in the job market, if you're performing poorly at your job, you get what? Fired. So I break some little stuff down like that to them, and so we lack a lot of schools. Once again, when we talk about funding, when funding gets cut, the first thing they do is take out of inner city schools. They take away trade schools. I mean, because I remember when I was in high school, I went to Booker T. Washington High School for the engineering profession. And it was a very unique high school because we call it upstairs and downstairs. All the kids who were upstairs classes, those were all the engineering kids. Because I went to high school in Texas. So they they got to go work at Exxon, NASA, seriously, like they got access to all these things. But the downstairs kids, you know what I mean? We didn't really get that access. And granted, we had auto mechanics, we had wood shop, all those things. But then they took all these things out of schools.
Yeah, they did.
You know what I mean?
And those are trade skills that we really could use today.
Definitely.
But Cedric, this has been a great conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for
You're
being
welcome.
here. We look forward to having you come back and talk more about education and all things school board, anything that you can share.
Right.
Thank you again. I'm Nicole Brown. This is Around the District. Thank you for joining us. Like, click, do whatever you do on social media.
Subscribe.
Yes, subscribe. There you go. And follow us. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Cedric.
No problem.